The tears streaming down Nora Fairchild's face glistened in the harsh Montana sun of 1876 as she stared at the barren fields that had once promised a future. The drought had stolen everything: her crops, her hope, and now potentially the land her father had left her. With calloused hands, she wiped away the evidence of her weakness, unaware of the tall figure approaching on horseback from the western ridge. Preston Young pulled his horse to a stop, dust swirling around the animal's legs as he surveyed the desolation before him. He'd been riding for 3 days, following rumors of available land. What he found instead was a struggling homestead and a woman whose grief seemed as vast as the empty fields surrounding her. "Madam," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "Pardon the intrusion." Nora spun around, startled by the unexpected voice. She hadn't heard anyone approach, too lost in her despair. Hastily wiping her face, she straightened her back and lifted her chin, unwilling to appear vulnerable before a stranger. "This is private property," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Preston dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame unfolding from the saddle with practiced ease. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands, and approached slowly, respecting the wariness in her eyes. "I can see that," he replied, his gaze sweeping over the dusty fields. "I'm Preston Young. I've been looking for land to farm. Heard there might be opportunities in these parts." "Well, you heard wrong," Nora replied sharply, "unless you consider failure an opportunity." A hint of a smile touched Preston's weathered face. "Sometimes failure is just success taking its time." Nora scoffed, too tired for optimism. "Tell that to my creditors. They're not known for their patience." Preston stepped closer, his boots kicking up small clouds of the dry earth. He crouched down, picked up a handful of soil, and let it sift through his fingers. His eyes, as blue as the Montana sky, studied the ground with knowing intensity. "This is good land," he said finally. "Just needs water and the right seed. Both of which require money I don't have," Nora replied bitterly. Preston stood, brushing the dirt from his hands. "I've got seed," he said simply, "and I know how to find water where others can't." Nora's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And what would you want in return? Half my land? Because plenty of men have offered similar bargains." "Not half your land," Preston replied. "Just a fair chance to prove what I'm saying. We plant together, we harvest together. After that, we can discuss terms." "We?" Nora challenged. "Yes, madam. We." Preston's gaze was steady, honest in a way Nora hadn't encountered since her father's passing. "I need land to farm, you need help saving yours. Seems like Providence to me." Nora looked past him to the saddlebags on his horse. "And you just happen to be carrying seed with you?" "I'm a farmer without a farm," Preston said with a slight shrug. "I carry what matters. The seed's good drought-resistant wheat from back east. Experimental but promising." Against her better judgment, Nora felt a flicker of hope. "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking for payment," Preston replied. "Just partnership." The word hung between them, weighted with possibilities Nora wasn't ready to consider. She turned away, gazing once more at the fields that had broken her heart. "You can stay in the barn tonight," she said finally. "We'll talk more in the morning." Preston nodded, replacing his hat. "Fair enough, Mississippi?" "Fairchild. Nora Fairchild." "Miss Fairchild," he acknowledged with a slight bow of his head. "Thank you for your hospitality." As he led his horse toward the barn, Nora watched him go, wondering if she just made a terrible mistake or found salvation in the form of a wandering cowboy with mysterious seeds and even more mysterious intentions. The night passed slowly for Nora. Sleep eluded her as she considered her options, which were few. The bank would claim her land within the month if she couldn't show evidence of a viable crop. Her neighbors had already abandoned their farms, heading west toward Oregon or Washington, where the rains were more reliable. She'd stayed out of stubborn loyalty to her father's memory. But even that wasn't enough to make the skies open or the earth yield. Morning came with its usual indifferent brightness. Nora dressed quickly and headed to the barn, half expecting to find Preston Young gone. His talk of partnership just another empty promise. Instead, she found him already awake, feeding his horse with grain from his own supplies. "You're still here," she observed, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Preston looked up, a smile warming his features. "Said I would be, didn't I?" "Men say a lot of things," Nora replied, crossing her arms. "True enough," Preston acknowledged. "But I'm not most men." Over a simple breakfast of cornbread and coffee, Preston laid out his plan. He'd noticed the dry creek bed that ran along the eastern edge of her property. With some work, he believed they could dam a section and divert water from the underground spring he'd spotted signs of near the northern ridge. "That's impossible," Nora protested. "That creek's been dry for 2 years. "On the surface, yes," Preston agreed. "But there's water below. I've seen the signs certain plants that only grow where water's accessible the way the ground dips just so. Trust me, Miss Fairchild. I've spent my life reading the land. And if you're wrong, then I'll move on, and you'll be no worse off than you are now." The simplicity of his offer was tempting. Nora finished her coffee, considering. "Where did you learn about farming? Your accent isn't local." Preston's eyes clouded briefly. "Pennsylvania originally. My father had a farm there. After the war, things changed. I headed west, worked ranches from Texas to Dakota Territory. Picked up knowledge along the way." "The war?" Nora asked quietly. "Yes, madam. 4 years with the Union Army." He spoke matter-of-factly, but Nora could see the shadow that passed over his face. "My father fought as well," she said. "Came home different." Preston nodded, understanding passing between them. Many did. After breakfast, they walked the property together. Preston pointed out features Nora had never noticed: subtle changes in vegetation, the way certain rocks were positioned, tracks of animals that knew where to find water. His knowledge was impressive, his confidence contagious. By midday, they'd marked the spot where Preston believed they should dig. With the sun beating down mercilessly, they began the back-breaking work of clearing rocks and breaking ground. Nora worked alongside him, refusing to be outdone despite her smaller frame. "You don't have to prove anything to me, Miss Fairchild," Preston said when he noticed her hands beginning to bleed. "I'm not proving anything," Nora replied stubbornly. "This is my land. I won't watch while someone else saves it." Preston's respect for her visibly grew. "Fair enough. But maybe we could use tools better suited to your hands." He fashioned her a smaller handle for the pickaxe, showing her how to leverage her weight rather than rely on brute strength. By sunset, they'd made significant progress, a 6-foot hole that showed promising signs of moisture in the soil. Exhausted but strangely exhilarated, they returned to the house. Nora prepared a simple stew from her dwindling supplies, aware of Preston's eyes on her as she moved around the kitchen. "Tomorrow we'll hit water," he predicted as they ate. "Then we can start preparing the fields for planting." "You seem very certain," Nora observed. "I am." His confidence wasn't boastful, just stated as fact. "When you've wandered as long as I have, you learn to be sure of the few things you know." "And what else are you sure of, Mr. Young?" Preston held her gaze. "That this land is worth saving, and so is its owner." Heat rose to Nora's cheeks, and she looked away first. "You don't know me." "I'm learning," he replied simply, "and I like what I'm learning." That night, with Preston back in the barn, Nora lay awake again. This time, instead of worry, she felt something unfamiliar: hope, mingled with a different kind of awareness. She told herself it was merely gratitude for his help, nothing more. But even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. The next morning arrived with a surprise: clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain for the first time in months. "See," Preston said when he spotted her staring at the sky. "Even the heavens approve of our partnership." True to Preston's prediction, they hit water that day. It wasn't a gushing spring, but a steady seepage that soon created a small pool at the bottom of their excavation. Preston worked tirelessly, enlarging the hole and reinforcing its sides with stones. By evening, they had the beginnings of a well that would feed the irrigation channels they planned to dig to the fields. The rain came that night, a gentle shower that lasted until dawn. It wasn't enough to soak the fields, but it softened the earth, making their work easier. Nora woke to find Preston already outside, his face turned up to the clearing sky, a look of pure joy illuminating his features. "It's a sign," he said when he noticed her watching. "The land wants to live again." Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from sunrise to sunset. Preston showed Nora how to create irrigation channels that would maximize the water from their well. They cleared stones from the fields, prepared the soil, and finally, planted the special wheat seed Preston had brought. As they worked side by side, Nora learned Preston's story in pieces. He'd lost his family farm after returning from the war to find his parents dead from influenza and the bank foreclosing. He'd worked as a hired hand, a cowboy, a ranch foreman, always saving, learning, waiting for his chance to have land again. "Why my land?" Nora asked one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the newly planted fields in gold. "There's unclaimed land further west." "I believe in signs," Preston replied. "When I saw you crying over these fields, something told me this was where I needed to be." His honesty disarmed her. No flowery compliments or strategic flattery, just simple truth that resonated with her own practical nature. "And now?" she asked, her voice softer than intended. "Do you still believe that?" Preston turned to her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "More than ever." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Finally, Preston stood, breaking the tension. "We should rest. Tomorrow we finish the main irrigation channel." But as he walked toward the barn, he paused. "Miss Fairchild, Nora, I want you to know that I respect your independence. This is your land, and I'm here at your invitation. If at any point you want me to leave, just say the word." Nora nodded, oddly disappointed by his retreat. "Thank you, Mr. Young, but I believe we have a harvest to bring in together." His smile in response warmed her more than the evening sun. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their days. They rose early, worked the fields, tended the growing wheat, and expanded their irrigation system. The well Preston had discovered proved reliable, providing enough water to nurture their modest crop. In the evenings, they would sit on Nora's porch, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Nora found herself watching Preston when he wasn't looking, the confident way he moved, the gentleness in his hands when he examined the tender wheat shoots, the laugh lines that appeared when he smiled. She told herself it was natural to notice these things about someone you worked closely with, but deep down, she knew it was more. One evening, a neighbor rode by Thomas Wilson, whose farm adjoined Nora's to the south. He'd been trying to court Nora since her father's death, his interest more in her land than in her person. He eyed Preston with obvious suspicion. "Heard you had a man staying here," Wilson said without preamble. "Folks are talking, Miss Fairchild." "Folks always talk," Nora replied coolly. "Mr. Young is my business partner." Wilson snorted. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" Preston stepped forward, his stance relaxed but his eyes hard. "Mr. Wilson, I believe you owe Miss Fairchild an apology. Wilson's hand drifted toward his gun. I don't owe anything to a woman who forgets her place. In one fluid motion, Preston moved between Nora and Wilson. Her place is wherever she chooses it to be. Now apologize or leave. The tension crackled between them. Finally, Wilson spat on the ground. You'll regret this partnership, Nora. When the bank takes this land, don't come crying to me. After he rode away, Nora turned to Preston. You shouldn't have confronted him. He has friends in town. I won't stand by while someone disrespects you, Preston replied, his jaw set. Not even to keep the peace. His protectiveness both irritated and touched her. I've been handling Thomas Wilson for 2 years without your help. I don't doubt it, Preston said, his expression softening. But now you don't have to handle him alone. The simple statement, the acknowledgement that she wasn't alone anymore, affected Nora more deeply than she wanted to admit. That night, after Preston retired to the barn, she cried for the first time since he'd arrived, not from despair, but from a confusing mixture of gratitude, fear, and something that felt dangerously like love. The next morning, Nora made a decision. After breakfast, she approached Preston with determined steps. The barn is no place for a business partner, she said firmly. There's a spare room in the house. You should move your things there. Preston studied her face carefully. Are you sure? People like Wilson will talk even more. Let them, Nora replied with a lift of her chin. This is my farm and my choice. That evening, Preston moved his meager belongings into the small room that had once belonged to Nora's father. The house felt different with his presence inside it, warmer, more alive. They were careful to maintain proper boundaries, but the simple domestic acts of sharing meals at the same table and moving around each other in the kitchen created an intimacy that neither could deny. Their wheat continued to grow, defying the lingering drought conditions that plagued their neighbors. Preston's special seed proved hardy, requiring less water than traditional varieties. When the banker, Mr. Hammond, rode out to inspect the property, clearly expecting to find it failing, his surprise at seeing green fields was evident. This is unexpected, Hammond admitted, removing his hat to wipe his brow. Miss Fairchild, it appears you've found a way to make this land productive again. We have, Nora corrected, deliberately standing close to Preston. Mr. Young is my partner in this enterprise. Hammond's eyes narrowed slightly. I see. And what exactly is the nature of this partnership? Before Nora could respond, Preston spoke. Miss Fairchild has graciously allowed me to contribute my farming expertise and special drought-resistant seed in exchange for a share of the harvest. It's a business arrangement, pure and simple. For now, Hammond said with a knowing smile that made Nora's cheeks burn. Well, regardless, if you bring in this crop successfully, the bank will be willing to extend your loan terms, Miss Fairchild. Assuming, of course, that your arrangement remains stable. After Hammond left, Nora paced the porch angrily. How dare he imply as if I would, as if we— Nora, Preston interrupted gently. People will always talk. What matters is what we know to be true. She stopped pacing and faced him. And what is that, exactly? What is true about us, Preston? The question hung between them, weighted with weeks of unspoken feelings. Preston took a step toward her, then hesitated. What's true is that I came here looking for land and found something far more valuable, he said quietly. What's true is that I admire you more than any woman I've ever known. What's true is that I want to stay, not just for the harvest, but for all the seasons that follow. His words stole Nora's breath. No man had ever spoken to her with such honest emotion. I can't offer you much, Preston continued. I don't have money or position. All I have is my knowledge, my hands, and my heart if you want it. Nora looked at him, really looked at him. The sun had darkened his skin, and hard work had leanness to his frame. His eyes held the same steadiness they had that first day when he'd promised they would harvest together. "I've never needed money or position," she said finally. "But I do need someone I can trust. Someone who sees me as an equal, not a possession or a means to acquire land." "Is that how you see me?" Preston asked. "Someone you can trust?" Nora nodded slowly. "Yes, God help me, but yes." Preston closed the distance between them, taking her work-roughened hands in his. "Then trust me now when I say that what I feel for you has nothing to do with this land and everything to do with the woman who loves it enough to fight for it." When he kissed her, it was gentle but sure like everything else about him. Nora felt the last of her defenses crumble as she returned his kiss, allowing herself to acknowledge what her heart had known for weeks. That night, for the first time, they sat together on the porch swing, Nora's head resting against Preston's shoulder as they watched the stars appear. They spoke of the future cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Preston shared his dreams for improving the farm, ideas for crops that would thrive in the challenging climate. Nora told him of her hopes to expand, perhaps adding livestock once the fields were established. "We could build a proper irrigation system," Preston suggested. "Divert water from the spring to a reservoir, then channel it to wherever we need it." Nora smiled at his use of "we" and "our," how natural it sounded now. "My father always wanted to try fruit trees along the southern slope. Said the soil there was different." "He was right," Preston agreed. "I noticed that too. Apples would do well there, maybe some hardy pears." They planned and dreamed as the moon rose higher, their future taking shape in words and shared visions. When they finally said goodnight, Preston still insisting on sleeping in the spare room despite their changed relationship, Nora felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. The weeks passed, and their wheat grew tall and strong. Other farmers began to take notice, riding by to observe the green fields that stood in stark contrast to the struggling farms around them. Preston freely shared his knowledge, explaining the irrigation techniques and offering advice on water conservation. "You could charge for that information," Nora observed one evening after a neighbor had spent hours learning about their methods. Preston shook his head. "Knowledge should be shared, not sold. These people are our community now." His generosity was yet another quality that endeared him to her. Despite his own difficult past, he harbored no bitterness, no desire to hoard his expertise for personal gain. As harvest time approached, Preston rode into town and returned with surprising news. The experimental wheat they'd planted had gained attention beyond their small community. An agricultural society in Denver wanted to study their methods and possibly distribute the seed more widely. "They're offering to buy a portion of our harvest at premium prices," Preston explained, his eyes bright with excitement. "And they want both of us to write a paper on our irrigation techniques." Nora was stunned. "Us? Write a paper? But I'm just a farmer." "You're a successful farmer who's growing crops in conditions others consider impossible," Preston corrected. "Your knowledge is valuable, Nora." The validation not just of their relationship, but of her as a farmer in her own right meant more to Nora than any romantic declaration could have. Harvest time arrived with a flurry of activity. Preston hired workers from town to help, paying fair wages from his own savings. The fields yielded better than even he had predicted, the golden wheat standing tall and proud under the autumn sun. As they worked side by side cutting and binding the wheat, Nora found herself watching Preston with growing certainty. This man, this kind, knowledgeable, steadfast man, had brought more than seed to her failing farm. He'd brought hope, partnership, and a love she hadn't believed possible. On the final day of harvest, as the last wagon of wheat was loaded for transport to town, Preston took Nora's hand and led her to the center of the field. The setting sun bathed everything in gold, from the stubble beneath their feet to Preston's sun-streaked hair. "I made you a promise when I arrived," he said, his voice low and serious, "that we would harvest together. I've kept that promise." "You have," Nora agreed, her throat tight with emotion. Preston knelt before her, still holding her hands. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold band. "Now I want to make another promise. To stand by your side through every planting and every harvest, through drought and plenty, for all the seasons of our lives." Tears filled Nora's eyes, not tears of despair like those he'd first witnessed, but tears of joy. "You brought more than seed to these fields, Preston Young. You brought life back to them and to me. Is that a yes?" he asked, his smile widening. "Yes," Nora whispered. 1,000 times, yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the town church, with neighbors and even Mr. Hammond in attendance. The banker had been impressed enough by their successful harvest to offer additional loans for farm improvements, which they cautiously accepted with clear terms. As winter settled over the farm, Preston and Nora worked together planning for spring. They expanded the irrigation system, prepared new fields for planting, and began construction on a small orchard on the southern slope. In the evenings, they wrote their paper for the Agricultural Society, combining Preston's theoretical knowledge with Nora's practical experience. The first snow found them sitting before the fireplace, Preston reading aloud from a book of poetry, while Nora sketched designs for a garden she wanted to plant near the house. The domesticity of the scene sometimes still surprised her, how quickly they had formed a partnership that encompassed all aspects of life. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Stopping here instead of finding your own land?" Preston set the book aside and considered her question seriously. "How could I regret finding exactly what I didn't know I was looking for? But this was my father's farm, not yours. And now it's ours," Preston said simply. "Not yours or mine, but something we're building together. That's worth more than having my name on a deed." Spring arrived with renewed promise. The wheat fields turned green again, the new orchard showed its first buds, and Nora discovered she was expecting their first child. As she shared the news with Preston, watching his face transform with wonder and joy, she remembered that first day standing in barren fields, crying over what seemed lost forever. "When you rode up that day," she said as he held her close, his hand gently covering the place where their child grew, "I thought you were just another drifter with empty promises." Preston laughed softly. "And I thought you were just another stubborn farmer too proud to accept help." "We were both right in a way," Nora admitted with a smile. "And both wrong," Preston added. "Gloriously, wonderfully wrong." As they stood together at the edge of their thriving fields, Nora reflected on how completely her life had changed in a single year. From desolation to abundance, from solitary struggle to shared purpose, from empty fields to the promise of harvest, and now, from two souls finding each other to a family beginning to grow. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Nora leaned against him, drawing strength and comfort from his solid presence. "I'm thinking that some crops take longer to harvest than others. That sometimes the seeds we plant bear fruit in ways we never expected." Preston's arm tightened around her shoulders. "And sometimes a man looking for land finds a home instead." Together they watched the wind ripple through their wheat, golden waves undulating across fields that had once been barren fields that now, like their joined lives, promised harvests for many years to come.